Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today at this webinar, which we're excited to host to kick off the Zero Emission Buildings Conference, which will be taking place in person next week at Expo Tel Aviv. That's Tuesday, September 16th. If you forget, it's written up here. And we're really excited to kick off the events around the conference with Mina Hasman. I'll take a moment to introduce Mina, and then she'll get to share with us her excellent presentation, and we'll leave some time after for Q&A, so feel free to submit some questions through the chat or the Q&A option on Teams, and with that, we'll get started. Mina Hasman leads sustainability and well-being operations at Skidmore, Owings Merrill, focusing on the long-term vision and strategy for achieving excellence in practice. She oversees the firm's progress on climate action as it relates to its global business operations and projects. She is also one of the world's most influential voices in climate-conscious design and has shaped global policy and education in sustainable architecture, authoring the RIBA Climate Guide, leading the Climate Framework Initiative, and serving in key roles in incredible organizations such as the World's Green Building Council. In 2023, she was also named one of Time's top 100 most influential climate leaders in business. And this is only the very short list of her accomplishments and impact. And so with that, I'll leave the floor to Mina to share an excellent conversation, and then we'll hear from all of you later in our Q&A. Thank you, Mina.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Laura. It's really an honor for me to be here. And I do hope that you'll enjoy the brief sort of thoughts that I'll be sharing with you today and the conversation we'll have. Before I start my presentation, I want to make sure that you can hear me well and then see my screen well.
Everything looks great, Mina. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you once again, Laura, for that kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this event. Unfortunately, I cannot be there in person next week, but I do hope the rest of the conference will be exhilarating and very insightful, and I do hope that I'll have an opportunity to come next year, hopefully. So today I want to sort of give you a different perspective on, typically as a sustainability consultant, expert, in-house expert within SOM, I provide a lot of guidance to our projects teams, looking at very scaled projects and suggesting sustainable design ideas on how to elevate design in projects. But today I actually wanted to take the conversation to a different place and talk about the meanings of words and the words that we use as we describe the work that we do within the built environment sector at large. And of course, I will always be talking about from a sustainability perspective, because this is where my background comes from, and this is where I feel perhaps most comfortable and confident in expressing myself. So considering this, I want to explore with you the theme that is deceptively simple but deeply consequential: from zero to resilience, redefining better buildings, and what that means in the words that we're describing them. I want to begin with words because words really shape how we think and how we design, and ultimately how we build. So I think the stories that we tell about sustainability, about design, about built environment, eventually becomes the vision and the mission of any activities that we're undertaking as built environment professionals, and therefore the words carry a lot of weight. And that's the reason why I want to emphasize and focus on the words that we're using and what they mean. Because the words also set the agendas and create expectations, as I mentioned before, and also influence the pathways we pursue. In recent years, words like sustainable, circular, net zero, green, resilient have gained enormous traction. Yet the way we interpret them individually or collectively is far from uniform. So today I would like to reflect on mainly three things: how we understand words, how we interpret them, and how we use them to drive action. Because in the end, the words we use and the meaning we attach to them lay really the foundations of the buildings, the cities, and the futures we create for ourselves and the next generations to come. So let's start with perhaps the phrase that brings us together today, which is better building. When we hear these words, we instinctively ask ourselves three questions, or at least I do. What is better building? How is it better? Compared to what came before or what it stands besides, and also better against what benchmark, what reference point. This unconscious questioning is powerful because the answers we give to these questions, or questions such as these ones, individually or culturally as well as professionally, shape our collective definition of what better building one can even argue what sustainable building means. And that definition matters because it frames the scope of a project, guides the design intent, influences decisions, sets the expectations in terms of responsibilities along the value chain of that built environment that we may be designing, influencing, and interfering. And it actually creates these legacies for decades that we're going to leave, and if not for centuries. So simple words such as sustainable building or better building, actually subconsciously, maybe we never thought about it that way, but it really carries a lot of weight and meaning in the role and the realization of that building or that built environment that we may be creating. And a single headline in a project brief or in a project at all can really ripple through generations, shaping how a building is conceived, how visions and ambitions are defined, and how they're delivered and remembered. And as soon as we set that definition of better building, the next question inevitably follows. How is it better? And the question reflects, this particular question, I would say, reflects our values. For some, better means healthier spaces filled with daylight, fresh air, and access to nature. For others, it may mean lower energy bills or reduced negative environmental impact. For developers, it may mean higher, longer-term value and sort of the asset value that is generated throughout the life of that built environment. For communities, it may mean safety, inclusivity, dignity, and belonging. So what we call better is never neutral. It emerges from our ethical values and moral principles. And these values translate into design standards, project targets, and contractual obligations. So they shape not only the form of buildings, but also the narrative as well as the performance of those buildings, and down the line also the accountability of those who are delivering those buildings. In this way, words evolve from vision to mission, from mission to measurable outcomes. But then comes the third question: better against what, really? Here lies the real test, because to call something better, we must define the baseline. And that baseline definition is really crucial because that's how we're measuring the impact of any better building or any, I'm going to say, sustainable building. And against how do we measure progress and define success also becomes a critical element of how we realize and visualize manifesting that ambition in real life. Are we defining and measuring progress against yesterday's buildings codes or today's, against current global best practices, or against the limits of the planet itself? This is where really data matters, because without data, we really cannot put a sort of real meaning to these, perhaps what may initially be seen as abstract ambitions or visionary blue sky thinking. And for example, we can take a renovation project. If an existing building consumed 35 kilowatt hours per square meter of energy per year, and then the renovated building only consumes 25 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, then that building is defined as better. Because, and then the word better or more sustainable is not a vague aspiration in this instance, because it's very much measured and verified with reduced energy use as seen in this example. So numbers really anchor meaning. They transform debate into clarity, and they help us create a shared understanding, which is essential in a world where contextual priorities or context differ so dramatically. And context does differ, because a better building in Tel Aviv will not be the same as the one in Venice, Montreal, or Riyadh. In Riyadh, resilience and better buildings means shade, insulation, and protection from the desert sun. In Venice, it may mean flood resistance and adaptability to rising sea levels. In Montreal, it's about withstanding extreme cold. And in Jerusalem, it's about navigating multiple stresses at once: water scarcity, energy security, seismic risk, and the unique cultural fabric of communities. So as you can see in these brief examples I'm giving, the way we can describe better building or a sustainable and resilient building or a built environment will be very different because of the contextual and geographic priorities that these handful of examples I'm sharing here with you today. And there are many more of these ones around the world. And just as geography shapes meaning based on climate needs, based on topographic sort of configurations of cities and urban forms, so do the perspectives of the end users of any built environment and specifically buildings we're creating. Because end users almost always interpret sustainability or better building differently than we do. And I say that as an architect and environmental engineer. Because for students, it may be about integrating technology that educates them about their building's performance. So they may be defining a building being better or more sustainable if it has integrated technology in them, such as in the example that you see here from the Kathleen Grimm School, the world's, if not one of the first few in the world net zero energy schools designed in New York City. For hospital patients, better building or more resilient and sustainable building may mean that it has integrated nature with abundant daylight and access to greenery. Because for them, it's about their comfort, it's about their well-being. And that is only achieved through the integration of nature into the built environment that they may be occupying for very long periods of time. So for them, the word and the meaning of better, or the description of what better is, or what sustainable and resilient is going to be very different to someone such as the student example I've given with the previous school, where the priority may be about optimizing the building's performance and ensuring that technology can help inform end users and educate them about the building. And for data center owners, to another extreme, it may mean large-scale integration of renewable energy that ensures reliable, cost-efficient operations, while also reducing the vast amount of carbon footprint of digital infrastructure that comes with it. So for that type of building typology and use and that type of clients, better building is the one that integrates renewable energy at scale because of the reasons I've outlined. So I think with these very small examples I'm giving here, the lesson I would say is very clear. No single feature, neither the smart systems or technologies that we see on the first example, nor greenery, green walls, roofs, or vegetation incorporated into the buildings, or solar panels as examples of renewable energy technology systems, such as seen on the example on the very right-hand side here, alone makes a building more sustainable or better than others. Because true sustainability is really holistic. And it's about how a building contributes simultaneously to health and well-being of the people, to the circular economy and the circularity of materials, and how we give more than one life to any product, any material, any built form and structure that exists. It's about ensuring that there is a fine balance achieved with reducing carbon and energy, while also providing all that the end users and occupants may need. And sometimes it's, we'll be trying to look at addressing competing priorities, because, for example, when we talk about a net zero example, net zero energy or net zero carbon building, I can contextualize this to make it, I think, easier to understand. In the UK, where I'm currently based in London, residential buildings or homes are designed to provide passive heating as much as possible. So they are designed for the colder winter period rather than the summer season, because the colder period is dominating still to this date in the overall climate charts. Which means buildings are being designed very heavily insulated, very airtight, so that the heat during the winter time can stay inside and can provide the passive heating that is needed to provide the comfort for the end users of homes or residential buildings. But that has it's almost like I think a contradiction to what maybe occupants may need, even though I talked about occupant comfort, may need from other priorities perspective. Because when the buildings are so insulated, it is true that they provide retention of heat and in turn comfort during the winter period. And one can even argue that it reduces energy bills that are associated with mechanical heating that the homes we need to have during the colder periods of the year. But during the summer, because the buildings are not adaptable, so I would say they're not actually resilient, even within the same year, to a changing climate, because during the summer, especially now the last few years, we've been experiencing a lot of very high and longer periods of very high solar radiation and very high temperatures outside during the summer season. And so these homes that are very much designed to retain heat indoors, they're actually overheating during the summer. And now residents, and including myself even, there's no air conditioning in the UK typically, so we all have fans that are sort of trying to cool the interior spaces during the summer period, which means that we're actually increasing our energy use and in turn energy bills during the summer while reducing them slightly during the winter periods. So I think it's really important to understand the competing priorities of, I talked about occupant comfort. Occupant comfort during winter versus summer may mean very different things to how a building should be designed better or more sustainable, so that it can remain resilient throughout the year, as in this example that I talked about in residential buildings or homes in the UK. And sort of going back to this holistic themes that I've briefly described. So we mentioned the health and well-being, we mentioned circularity of materials, carbon and energy performance, but there's also other key priorities, and these become more prominent as one moves from one geographic context to another. Because, for example, some countries have a greater demand on or scarcity of water. Therefore, water stewardship, which means conserving water as much as possible, can become even a greater priority for someone, let's say in India versus in the UK, because of the water scarcity and the low quality of water that is typically experienced in that country, in that part of the world. And of course, it's really important to always find the balance between the human needs. We talk about our own needs and our own comfort and well-being within the built environments we're creating, but there's also a very fine balance of achieving harmony, I would say, between humans and the natural ecosystem that the planet offers. So ensuring that biodiversity ecologies are enhanced and not necessarily harmed or a species sort of lost due to the interventions that we're providing as humans in the built form within the urban context around the world. And lastly, I think it's about connectivity and transport and providing affordable means and sustainable active means of enabling people to connect within the building that they may be designing, but also between buildings and between neighborhoods and cities at large. And this, I think, the last theme, as I'm describing them here in themes of six, the last theme is very much focused on trying to bring social equity into the equation of climate justice, into the equation of climate and biodiversity crisis and improvement against those ones. And these are sort of the themes that I even believe so strongly that they need to be looked at in tandem and very much closely together to be able to deliver truly better and more sustainable and resilient buildings and the built environment. I've actually written a book around these themes and iterated more and more how these themes are very much interlinked to one another and how they need to be evaluated as such to be able to deliver meaningful and long-lasting outcomes. To go from zero to resilient, as the title of my presentation today says. And I think it's really important that these dimensions or these topics it's acknowledged that they're deeply interconnected, and it's only once we advance them together that we can truly redefine what a sustainable or a better building is or can be. And the power, therefore, lies in the integration, not in the fragmentation. And therefore, I would even suggest that we as professionals and practitioners, or even as educators and academics within the built environment landscape, we also need to make sure that we are not working in isolation, that we bring together others along the journey, along the value chain, to ensure that collaborative thinking against all of these topics, at the least, is there present in every key decision making. Because in fairness, I think, even though I mentioned that I wrote this book to help guide built environment professionals, not just architects around the world, to understand the interlinkages that exist between these topics and how they sometimes may be competing priorities. It is also important to understand that not everyone can be subject matter expert or can bring substantial experience to deliver meaningful, innovative solutions to the built environment. And therefore, it's really important to bring experts and subject matter experts on, like water, for example, or ecology and biodiversity and so forth, as well as architects, engineers, planners and investors and so forth, and all the key decision makers that influence the built environment sector. And I think this mindset, hopefully I'm trying to set here, really brings us directly to the key word of resilience that I would like to emphasize here. The UN's Brundtland report from 1987 gave a universal definition of what sustainable development is. And I think I'm going to even say that this was, at the time, they didn't use the word resilient, but from what I gather, but I would say this is actually a true definition of what the resilient, not only sustainable, but a resilient building or built environment is. And it's about delivering built environments that meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability to future generations to meet their needs. So resilience builds very much on this foundation, taking even a step further by focusing not only on avoiding harm and meeting needs, but on adapting and regenerating and thriving in the face of uncertainty and change. Which is why redefining better building now means design not just for efficiency, but for resilience. Buildings that endure, adapt, and support communities long after their first occupants and residents have left should be the measure of success, in my humble opinion, in today's date. And the way we describe these ambitions also matters, because as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation today, that words evolve, and with them, the clarity of our intent evolves as well. So if we take one familiar example of net zero carbon, a very common 3 words that we kept hearing, or we keep hearing over the last few years, I think it has become a more regular part of our daily conversation and daily language nowadays. But I think to this day, I always say that to this day, we don't still speak the same language across the industry, because what net zero carbon means for me is probably something slightly more different, maybe not very, but slightly more different to someone that is even sitting within the same office as me at SOM next to me and working on the same project. So I think that defining a common ground to define what these terminologies and new sort of concepts mean, such as circular economy, net zero carbon, resilient buildings. We keep hearing regenerative design. We keep hearing these sort of new concepts and terms emerging and being added to our dictionaries and glossaries and language. It's really important to unpack what each of them mean and what it means when they come together. So I want to give you just a brief example of the net zero carbon in this definition. On its own, zero can feel quite hollow. But then when we add the carbon, we have a focus. And then we add the net, and then we introduce complexity, from carbon offsets to trade-offs to balances. And I won't get into this sort of technical aspects of it, but suddenly the word net actually influences drastically how we define a net zero carbon built environment. And then if we add a word such as building or community, then we can define the scale of the impact that we are aiming and ambitioning to achieve. And that also defines the sphere of influence that we have. If it's a net zero carbon building, maybe the sphere of influence is most of the occupants that are going to occupy that building. And maybe it's about the immediate local community where that building is going to be inserted. But if we talk about the community, a net zero community or net zero sort of master plan, then there is a much greater sphere of influence from not only the residents and those that are going to be visiting that site, that master plan, for example, but also others that are going to, like policymakers, that are going to help inform city planning, for example, based on that master plan's set of guidance and guidelines that may be provided as a result. So there is a lot of, I think, unrealized and subconscious and maybe indirect implications some of our words and eventually our decisions make. And I think we never really sit back and think about the impact of the words that we use. And and many still continue, I think, criticizing rightfully that even the word sustainability or sustainable design or sustainable building has been so overused and abused that people have that it actually lost the meaning, and people don't even know what it means. Anything can be sustainable, but it's actually not really true. And we need to dive deep and dig deep into understanding what each of those mean and in the context that we're using them. Because each word transforms the meaning, and each addition sharpens, as I've given the example here, or sometimes even blurs the intent. This is why precision matters, even in the language that we're using, as well as the designs that we may be delivering in buildings or the cities. And our industry, because without this precision, our industry risks downing in multiple competing definitions, and we lose the clarity and the need to act decisively. And this is really important. I don't know if this has been your experience, but my experience has been that over the recent years, more so than ever before, the clients, some of our clients that I work with, they get hung up on that one word of net zero carbon. They want to have that headline for their projects. And it's I say that it's our responsibility to walk them through what that exactly means, because it's not just adding a headline to a project saying that this is going to be the world's tallest, let's say, net zero carbon building. But what does that really mean? What decisions are you as the client going to make? What investments you may need to make down the line in the project, or even upfront to the design team, to explore avenues of getting that project to be truly net zero carbon in the definition that it deserves to be played out. And it all comes down to a sort of measurable impact. I'm all about data and numbers, because I think without numbers, as I mentioned before, it's just nice words on paper. And we definitely need to move away from nice words on paper and greenwashing and make it a reality. So I think I would just like to say, maybe just to conclude, that the words like better building, sustainable, net zero, and resilient are not just labels. And they should not be used as words for the sake of using them. They should be used as commitments to a reality, commitment to delivery. It's almost contracts that we're creating between us and the end users, and even the future generations that may be occupying the buildings and the built environments we're creating today. So when we define these words very clearly, root them in values, ethics, and morale that we are trying to instill within the built environment sector today, and if we can measure them with data, which I cannot emphasize enough, and adapt them to the context. So it's not, as I mentioned before, in the examples of Riyadh, Venice, and Montreal, and Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, the description of better and sustainable, and beyond description, the delivery of a sustainable or better building is going to be probably very different in those contexts. So we need to really adapt our ambitions to the local context and cater to the local contextual priorities that any given project, whether it be a country, city, and a regional or very specific local to the project side priority, that may need to be emphasized to deliver a truly locally adapted, sustainable, and better building. And I think in these conversations, as I'm suggesting here, some conversations we have with our clients, it's really important to also make the conversation, or to sort of the words and the language and the narratives that we're using to describe our design visions and ambitions to the audience, and make them relevant to them. Because I often have seen in my career over the last few years, especially, that many people say this is going to be the most sustainable building, or this is going to be the net zero carbon building. But some clients or some individuals, maybe not necessarily just clients in isolation, but some individuals don't want to, because maybe either they don't understand, or they truly don't want to, they don't appreciate the true meaning of sustainability or net zero carbon in these examples I'm given, and maybe that's not their priority, and they don't want to deliver a sustainable building. That's not what they're there for. But they want to deliver an economically viable and maybe fast selling property. And so if that's what their priority is, it's really important for us to understand where they're coming from. And instead of saying, we're going to deliver this net zero carbon building and help you reduce your environmental impact, which may not be at the top of their priority immediately, then we need to sort of tweak that narrative and say, we will be delivering you a truly economically sustainable, economically feasible, profitable building and asset that can also in turn be truly sustainable and minimize the environmental impact. That can become the secondary in the way that we play the narrative and the story, to be able to, maybe to convince is not the right word, but to be able to encourage the commitment from the clients and from the decision makers to come on board to the same ambitions that we may be setting ourselves. Let's say at SOM, one of our top priority is to deliver truly sustainable built environments everywhere around the world, and we would always use that as the first, perhaps one of the first very few narratives in our stories. But we also have learned over the years that we need to listen to our clients, and if that's not one of their first few narratives, that we need to cater the narrative to them so that we can bring them along the journey, and we can actually truly still deliver on the ambitions and the visions we're setting for the projects, but just telling them from a different perspective. And this may sound very simple, but I have seen drastic changes in our clients' mindset over the years, from a client not really much interested in sustainability at first to wanting to deliver the most ambitious, the tallest net zero carbon building in the world. So, and it was just because of that narrative. So I think the narrative switch is really can become a very powerful tool for us to use in our arsenal to deliver truly sustainable built environments, because it's the stories that we sell people. It's the stories that capture people's attention, captures people's excitement, and enables them to be a part of the journey of any built environment that anyone is creating around the world. I think the stories are the starting point, and I think that's why it's really important to use the right words and the right narratives in the way that we describe our ambitions and visions to be able to eventually get down to the metrics of 35 to 25 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, or net zero carbon, and so forth. And in the end, I think it's in this transformation of like mindset and the way that we approach our work, our projects, even our conversations, even the conversations we may be having today within our built environment sector community, that the words change, transform mindsets, and the mindsets transform actions. And this is how we can move from zero to resilience, because resilience is not really the end point. It's the capacity to keep redefining what better is, and the world around us, as the world around us continues to change. So it's really important to not treat it as end goal and this a snapshot of at this moment in time, but and measure the success of how resilient or how sustainable or how good performing that one building or that one interior space or that one city plan that you may have done as built environment sector professionals down in the next decade or in the next century. So I would like to say thank you for listening to me, and I will be more than happy to help answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mina. That was very insightful, and always refreshing to take a step back and look at how we define the terminology that we may use day in and day out. And so that's great, and I really enjoyed that exploration. Took a few notes for myself, and I have some questions from my side, but I'll take one question here first. And that's, in some projects, we find it hard to introduce new technologies or strategies that will bring higher efficiency to the projects, since developers will want to see previous implementations. How would you convince or encourage clients to be early adopters of energy efficiency measures or other sustainable strategies?
I think this is a great question, and it's a very common challenge. I mean, I face that every day, and I think there isn't a right answer. But I always say, as I mentioned before, I think it's really important to understand how one can convince a client to take on what they often will perceive, or developers and clients will often perceive as risk, if there hasn't been a tested and trialed case study or reference of any kind of technology or system or any new idea that you may be introducing in a project. However, maybe just some tips, or at least what I follow in these instances. If there isn't an implemented version of a technology, let's say a technology that you may be wanting to introduce in a project and it hasn't been done before, I rely a lot on like academic research that can provide, at least give a bit more confidence in the the real feasibility of any product that may be produced. And then secondly, I think that's usually the first go-to place. And secondly, I think it's important to unpack what that one technology may be doing. Let's say if it's a solar energy generation panel that has never been done before, then I will look at the previous existing technologies of similar kind of solar energy generation, like photovoltaic panels, for example, that have been implemented at scale, and try to unpack that one technology into different parts and say, you know, this technology is the next generation of, let's say, solar energy generation. And this version of the panels have never, I'm giving an example because I think it's the easiest way of explaining. this panel has never been incorporated into a building, but this panel has these, let's say, 3 components, and then 2 of them have already been installed in a previous version or a different version of this technology in many places around the world. So you can try to maybe unpack the system or the technology that you may be introducing, to be able to pull in real world examples or examples where these technologies or systems or ideas have been incorporated. I think that's probably the easiest way to help convince a client to invest. And then the third sort of lever I use often is to understand the longer term benefits, and not come from a necessarily from the perspective of this technology is going to save you a lot of energy, or this technology is going to make you stand out because you're going to be the first incorporating this technology into your building, but come from the perspective of especially cost savings. If you can somehow investigate, maybe work with the manufacturers or work with the academic researchers who have investigated this technology to understand what kind of longer term cost savings, because cost is at the top of everyone's priority. So if you can talk the cost language or the financial language, then I think you have a greater chance of trying to convince a client to invest something upfront, which may be a higher cost upfront, but in the long run, it may be a cost sort of return of investment eventually.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Hopefully
thank
that
you.
helps
Very
answer the
insightful.
question.
Yeah, some very insights that hopefully many of us can use. The next question that I have is about the guide that you wrote, taking the UN's SDGs and focusing them on the built environment and impact we have. And how did you approach that challenge of taking the blue sky concept, taking the theoretical and making it practical and categorizing it? What kind of approach did you take in making it a feasible guide that people can use going forward?
Thank you, Laura. I think that's a great question too, and it was a challenge. Right now it's all fine in the print. It looks completely, hopefully easy to navigate through it. But there is a lot of thinking, a lot of process that has gone into making it hopefully easily navigatable and very useful guide for everyone around the world. I took on this ambition of trying to, because there is no book to date out there that really contextualizes what the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals mean within the built environment context. We always, in every sector, not just in the built environment sector, everyone refers back to, when I say everyone who's in the sustainability mindset, for lack of a better description, refers to the UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 as a key framework and reference point to help define visions, ambitions, and specific strategies and paths forward in projects. But there was no guide, and it was an enormous task to take on. I think I had not appreciated at the very beginning when I set this ambition to myself. But it was important, maybe in that process, it was important to identify what can be directly impacted with the work that we do within the built environment sector. So even though the book references all the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, it specifically focused on the 10 goals that we directly impact with the work that we do today in the built environment sector as architects, planners, policymakers, and so forth. So it was important to narrow down a little bit the scope of the work to make it a bit more meaningful and tangible. And then once I was able to narrow that down, it was also important to understand what, I'm no expert by any means on all of those topics, but I wanted to make sure that there is expert views that are brought into one place, one resource where everyone can go to, and then it's signposts to many other resources around the world as well, so that if anyone is more interested, they can explore more specific concept or topic. So it was important, and I've done quite a long research to understand, to distill amazing work that is being done by others, by many subject matter experts around the world in various reports, academic papers, and books and so forth, to bring them into one place. And then when I was bringing it, I just wanted to make sure to make it relevant to the audience. I talked about before, like the narrative is really important. I cannot just, I said to myself, Mina, you cannot just talk about the hunger issues that some parts around the world may exist, because that's not going to be relevant to an architect. And immediately, they are not going to see the link of how their work can address hunger. So it had to be very relevant to the audience, and so I tried to so that became another filter of how I sort of narrow down the scope of the work, and eventually finding case study examples. Maybe this sort of slightly goes back to the first question. It's unfortunately, it's really important to have a case study where those maybe sometimes even theoretical ideas are implemented. What does it mean? You know, often people ask me when I was first writing the book, how are you going to even talk about circular economy? And this is almost 5 years ago when I was first writing the book. So the circular economy wasn't even as a common word as it is today. And so circular economy as a concept is a great concept, but what does it mean to the day-to-day work of an architect, engineer, and so forth? And it was really important to find a case study project, which I have a great example of how materials on an existing building have been reused on the renovation of that building. And I can give one example also of the work we've recently done at SOM, an office development in Italy, in Milan, from 1960s, was overdue in renovation. So we took on this project, but it was a heritage building, and it had this sort of red granite on the facade that no longer exists. It's not being produced as far as I understand. So we wanted to preserve that granite because it was so embedded within the identity of that building, as it was designed in 1960s, but the building was not designed to be deconstructed. So the moment we start pulling down the granite from the facade, it just started crumbling. But we actually still said, we're not going to give up here, and we still need to find a purpose for this material so that it can remain on site. And we actually, it was crushed and turned into, and it was put into molds, and eventually became a shading element of the newly renovated facade. So, and this is how the circularity of that material, how that material gained a second life, is a way to demonstrate how circular economy is manifested in an architecture project. So I try to find examples as such to be able to distill the more theoretical or conceptual thinking of sustainability under all of these themes that I covered in various chapters of the book into real life case study projects.
Very insightful, thank you. Sounds like it is very practical, and I'm looking forward to reading more of those case studies, because I think they're applicable to some of our projects here. So I have, I think we'll do 2 more questions. I have one more here from the audience. When we frame sustainability as a story, there's a risk that it might be perceived as marketing or PR exercise rather than a core business strategy. How can a company ensure its sustainability narrative is authentically rooted in its operations and strategy and not just a communication tool?
I think this is a wonderful question, and I think this is unfortunate. We see many examples of around the world, and I don't think it's ill-intentioned at all. I think it's just often people don't know how to unpack that and how to implement that in all aspects of a business. And I can maybe share humbly my experience at SOM, because we are a carbon neutral business, and and it requires a lot of work to claim that title, for lack of a description. First and foremost, maybe to help directly answer the question, is that it requires any kind of label or a claim or a commitment, in this case of net zero or zero carbon or carbon neutral or sustainable business. It requires the buy-in of every single key decision maker in the company. In our case, it's the partners. So it had to go through every single partner to ensure that they are all committed in ensuring that all aspects of the business will deliver on this vision and ambition that is being set. So that doesn't remain only nice words on paper or as a communications tool, but we actually wanted to be held accountable for claiming that title, or for having the carbon neutral business title against our name. And what that means is that we voluntarily signed up to Science-Based Targets Initiative, and also World Green Building Council's net zero carbon buildings commitment. I can share the links to them here as well if anyone is interested. These are globally recognized and probably the 2 main global initiatives and commitments that anyone can sign up to for free, to be held accountable to delivering on the net zero carbon neutral or sustainable commitments that a business is making. What that means is that they actually audit the processes that you follow, to ensure that all the data that you gather across the firm, in our case, across our more than 12 offices, where we gather data on energy use, water use, for example, and on carbon emissions, both operational and embodied carbon emissions, on a yearly basis at the least, and we actually report that data back to Science-Based Targets and to World Green Building Council, and they actually audit us. So think it's just going to that next step of wanting to be examined, audited, is the only way that can ensure that a business, in my humble opinion, that a business can truly be sustainable or be practicing sustainably in every aspect of its department, for lack of a better description. Because I think without that pressure, that external pressure, it can remain just a marketing tool.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Alfa also, our impact is a little smaller, but we are also carbon neutral now 2 years in a row. And we've done that external auditing through Global Network for Zero. So it definitely resonates with what you're sharing. We found a lot of value in that process as well. So we have one more question here, and that's talking about around data centers. Do you think it's reasonable for such a delicate facility to be operating on renewables? And if so, how do you think that the operators, the mega tech companies, will be convinced regarding reliability? How can they overcome that challenge?
This is a really good question, and I'm by no means a data center expert. I think that in my maybe educated guess and experiences over the years in working in other projects, I haven't worked on the data centers before, but I think it is still realistic and feasible to rely on renewables. I'm saying this very cautiously, rely on renewables in data centers as well, as long as the infrastructure for it is built resiliently and in a way that it can sustain itself. So I think maybe the first part of the question, yes, I think it is still realistic, and the renewable energy, and again, how we define renewable energy in different parts around the world is slightly different. For example, in Italy, the ground source is considered as a part of a renewable, whereas in majority of the in the UK it isn't. Anyway, so I think there are different options and opportunities besides PV panels and wind turbines that are the two most probably commonly acknowledged renewable technologies or systems out there that the data centers can leverage. In terms of reliability, I think I really don't know how the big tech companies can overcome the challenge immediately. I would anticipate that they will be actually, before they can make any commitment to purchasing renewable energy or incorporating renewable energy within their own data centers or facilities, they will probably do the due diligence of understanding the implications of extracting that energy, for lack of a better description, from natural resources, and again, the longer term sustainability of that investment.
Yeah, I think there's also an opportunity for that renewable energy to go hand in hand with storage, and those storage technologies, energy storage technologies, aren't always lithium battery based. There are a lot of interesting natural and renewable ways to implement storage and reliability. So I think between with what you said and the storage, there's a lot to explore there.
Indeed, yes.
So just before yeah, thank you for your time. Maybe if you could just share one project that you're particularly proud of or that you're familiar with that you felt achieved better in a unique and specific way.
I think I probably will share the project that from SOM. I really liked that, and maybe I can share it even two, because I mentioned both of them. One is the Kathleen Grimm School for Sustainability and Leadership in New York, which is the world's first, or one of the very few first net zero energy schools in not only in the US but around the world at that scale. That's something that I find it fascinating. Unfortunately, I did not get a chance to work on that project. It was before my time at SOM, but it's one project that I'm still proud of as part of an SOM family today. And then the other one is it's called Corsa Italia 23 in Milan, Italy. The project that has repurposed or reused the existing granite on the 1960s facade in its renovation. So that's a project I was heavily involved in from day one, and it's recently completed construction. So that's something I'm very proud of, because it really tried to push the thinking outside of the box almost 10 years ago when it was being designed, and it required us to work very closely, collaboratively with the contractor, with the client, with all the investors and everyone else whose decisions are influencing the end result. And that's sort of the new way of approaching a project, not only from a design perspective, but also in terms of the delivery and the process that we follow to ensure accountability in the ambitions that were set at design stage, and the outcomes speak for themselves. Hopefully, it's a very sustainable project. I think for that reason, I would just say that it's one that I'm very proud of, to have been a part of that process and design vision.
Well, thank you very much, Mina, for your insightful presentation and for answering our questions. And we look forward to staying in touch and having you visit Tel Aviv next time around. And so with that, I'll say goodbye and thank you to everyone for joining. And we'll see you at Tuesday at the Zero Emission Buildings Conference.
Thank you very much, L'Oreal. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.